Hello and welcome to The Mill. I am your host, Dusty Crane, and this week I thought we'd talk about the December 2021 Stonemaier newsletter. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and tackle the topic of the Stonemaier tax that I teased last week. Sounds good? Let's get to it. I know I'm running a little behind just now talking about the December newsletter, but we did get there eventually, right? It was a big month for Codename Sale, which went from print and assemble in November to freight shipping here in December. You heard that right? Sale is sailing. Sorry. Viticulture's expansion finished pre-production and components, and now in progress, Wingspansion 3 has finished art and continues in development, blind play testing, and solo design. Codename Cape has begun art, with the rest of our codenames hanging out in the same status they had in November. The big news, though, is the presence of a new codename, Codename Hive. Codename Hive has not only showed up, the design is finished, with development and blind testing already begun. That certainly bodes well to have made the chart in such a state. Now, I did do some legwork and look over the titles of games that were at Stonemaier Design Day, but nothing immediately jumped out at me that would match the codename. Hive did have me thinking bees, though. Stonemaier certainly has a friend in beekeeper and proofreader Josh Ward, not to mention around the time this hit the newsletter, Jamie had also backed the expansion to Honeybuzz, a game that he's talked favorably about. Could this be a coincidence? Sure, but where's the fun in only waiting for fact when we can partake in wild speculation? Big news, too, this week if you're a fan of Wingspan Digital Edition. The developers Monster Couch have officially announced they'll be working on adding the European expansion to the game and that it'll be available soon. Nothing other than soon, but it's still exciting to get that official notice that it's coming. And with that out of the way, this brings us to the topic of what was described to me as the Stonemaier tax. Let me just refresh your memory or give you a rundown if you missed last week's video. Someone reached out to me on the Mill's Twitter account and in DM said, "Talk about the Stonemaier tax, you coward." Now, normally, I just roll my eyes and ignore this kind of thing because it's hardly worthwhile to engage with someone who approaches you with name calling, but I guess it landed differently with me that day, and I responded back with maybe more kindness than it probably rightfully deserved. But I'm glad I did, because I think we had a pretty decent dialogue before they deleted or renamed their Twitter account. In a nutshell, I just informed them that I couldn't talk about something that I don't know anything about. I asked them what issues they were having and made mention of the various new storefronts in case they were unaware and they were talking about shipping fees or VAT charges or something like that. They replied back to me that that wasn't what they meant at all. They proceeded to lay out scenarios where early adopters of Stonemaier games, in their opinion, were beta testers. They called being an early adopter a Stonemaier tax. Their quote, "It's the cost you pay for buying a first edition." They mentioned various scenarios like Viticulture getting multiple versions before settling on Essential Edition. They mentioned modules removed from the game. They mentioned Euphoria getting gameplay adjustments by way of the Ignorance is Bliss expansion, which I think were just the primary starting positions in the tunnel based on player count. They mentioned Wingspan's between issue, where there was an extra E in the word between. If I'm being honest, it did feel like this person had an axe to grind, just by way of the pretty extensive list they provided. It ranged from excessively minor, like the soft, detailed mechs and leaders from the Kickstarter version of Scythe, to something legitimately gameplay impacting, like the missing pieces from My Little Scythe Pie in the Sky. That particular snafu, though, was caught before pre-orders, and retail and the games shipped with the parts that were missing from the box. I looked at that list as a fan of Stonemaier, as an ambassador of Stonemaier, and I was a little bummed. They weren't wrong. The things did happen. I wanted to give that person the validation of acknowledgement. It's true. It happened. I wish it didn't. They wish it didn't. And I promise you, my friends, Stonemaier Games wishes it didn't happen either. For me, it's hard to say Stonemaier wishes it didn't happen because I know the people behind the company. Hell, fans of the company, or fans of Stonemaier know the people behind the company. It feels so much more honest and personal to say Jamie, Joe, and Alex wish it didn't happen. I think it's important to acknowledge the humanity behind the company if they go to the extent of being transparent enough to introduce you to themselves. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that this happened. It's important to me to demonstrate that despite the fact that I'm a sponsored show, that I'm not turning a blind eye to this stuff. What I hope to do, though, is shed a little bit of light on how this stuff has largely naturally been getting better from release to release, and what Stonemaier is doing to make it even more unlikely of happening again. So let's start with the old proofreading process. Stonemaier has, to my knowledge, always had proofreaders. I've had the chance a couple of times, and I've seen the rule books in various states. I've seen a couple still in Microsoft Word without pictures, and I've seen rule books that already have been turned into PDFs with the art, etc. In the past, I'd get that one pass look at it, and my job would be complete. There were others who had proofed prior to my involvement, though, because there'd often be markups or comments listed there, too. I'd offer whatever help I could via correction of typos or maybe making a request for clarity, and then I'd see what happened when I got the game. That was my experience with the old process. The new process, though, is so much more structured and robust. Jamie's outlined this in blog posts, but essentially the new proofreading team gets to see the process from cradle to grave. I see a folder with a game name. In them are folders or subfolders like unedited prototypes, final files ready to print, digital proofs, PPCs, etc. Proofreading team members will be contacted when it's time to begin proofreading whatever step in the process we're requested to proof. But then, as items are added, modified, we're invited to check in on the process and see how our changes have been implemented. We're asked to look over the files before they're submitted to the printer, and we're notified when the digital proofs arrive for review. We also get pictures of the pre-production copy. This new process has allowed for full transparency along the way. So if a mistake is introduced in a step after our original review, there are ample opportunities for all of us privy to that information to review and catch it before it goes to print. All of this detail Jamie has blogged about before, so I'll toss a link to that in the description. Here's what I've learned, though, through all of this. It was remarkably surprising how difficult this process is. How things get made is beyond me. It's not just the text either. I always have scored very high in testing that required spatial awareness or math problems that required dimensional awareness, but for some reason, looking at a PDF of a punchboard where pages and page 1 and page 2 are essentially flipped on the y-axis to make sure things line up front to back is oddly brain-burning. I've legitimately worried more than once about submitting the time I've spent at the end of the project because I'm so worried my hours are so much longer than other proofreaders and it'll look like I'm milking the system. Folks, I care. I find myself doing multiple passes and reading each pass in a different way. One, focused on the individual words, devoid of any meaning, and then another pass focusing on each complete sentence, and then another on whether any of it together makes any kind of sense. I have laser focus on making sure the game is the very best it can be. But here's the thing. So did Jamie. So did Josh. So did every single other proofreader and editor from the dawn of Stonemaier to today. This new process puts more eyes on the product, but we're still human, and I think that's something that is woefully absent in the concept of a Stonemaier tax. A tax is purposeful. It's defined in advance. To imply that any of these issues happened purposely, or hell, even out of neglect, is to ignore the efforts of every person who gave the most precious commodity we have to offer, and that is finite time. The mill has afforded me an opportunity to get to know one of my favorite designers better than I thought possible, even despite him being a rather open book online. I know that Jamie cares about the people who have provided him the livelihood he enjoys today, the people who have championed his products, and even just give them a shot and tell others about their experiences, good and bad. Jamie has given a lot of his finite time to us too. above and beyond the normal expectations of a game designer and publisher. And as silly as it might sound, I once worried about the hours he put in, and I was really thankful for Megan when I heard about that relationship, because there's more to life than work. I guess I slipped a little bit off track there with the idea of having finite time for a moment. If you ever find yourself in the position of having a sponsored YouTube channel and wonder if your sponsor is checking on your content, teasing a future video about a tax is a pretty good way to get their attention, it seems. Jamie reached out to me and mentioned he saw the video and wondered if I'd let him know what the Stonemaier tax was, so I relayed all of this to him. As I presented the wrongs that were laid to me as my sponsor, he could have asked me to reconsider. He could have insisted that I reconsider. He could tell me to read a response to the concern. He could have let me know that I was on thin ice, and he didn't do any of those things. He asked if I would consider reading a response. He told me to feel free to share none, some, or all of the comment he had in response to the examples I provided him. The amount of respect that I have for Jamie, even with none of this sponsorship nonsense in play, it was a no-brainer. I'd absolutely read his response, so I'm going to do that now. The following is quoted. "My goal every minute of every day is to bring joy to tabletops worldwide. I don't always accomplish that goal, but it's at the heart of every decision I make. Not every product we make gets a reprint, so it's incredibly important to get it right the first time. I bear that responsibility, and I take it very seriously. I'm incredibly grateful for those who support our first-run products, even if that journey occasionally requires a patch along the way." End quote. I know this conversation that we had has been weighing on his mind because he emailed me this week to point my attention to an organizer change in Viticulture Essential Edition. Fans of Viticulture have mentioned changes they'd like to that insert, most notably that it be made easier to get the game pieces out of the insert, and so after 8 years, Jamie went back to the drawing board and had that insert reworked to a very nice removable insert with lids that keep everything in place but also make setup easier. The comments on his post varied from "this is awesome" to "where can I buy this" to at least one person communicating regret for just having picked up the game. I worry our Twitter friend would consider this one more example of early adopters getting the short end of the stick, but I'd be more bummed out to learn that innovation has to stop after a product releases. It should be commended that the insert was revisited. It seems I'm not the only one who feels that way too, because for the most part, the reaction was positive and filled with, "How can current owners get this insert?" To which Jamie replied, he'll have more news about how that can happen next year. That's another topic for another time, I suppose. Are we going to get a Viticulture Legendary box similar to Scythe and Wingspan? Or will there be an option like Role Player's latest game expansion that had a box big enough to hold the core game and all expansions? I guess we'll see next year. As for this concept of a Stonemaier tax, I think it's a phantom issue born of mundane human error and not neglect or lack of care. We've seen the quality issues steadily improving. Secrets and Soirees was delivered without a hitch, as was the retail version of Red Rising and Rolling Realms. And so far as I've heard regarding Tapestry, the landmark cards being mirrored are the sole issue, and it isn't gameplay impacting. A bummer, yes, but not gameplay impacting. That said, I don't want to demean anyone who's felt burned by some of these issues before, because it's okay to feel bummed out about a product you spent your hard-earned money on. I hope two things going forward. First, I hope this new proofreading process works as intended. I hope the increased eyes on the product across all kinds of various stages will result in a flawless first print run. I mean, that's always been the goal, but proofreaders have more opportunities to catch things than ever before, and I'm happy to share that our first game that we saw through the entire process, I think, is the first game to come out in 2022. I say I think because I know the game I proofed, but I don't know its code name, so who knows? But I feel pretty confident. Second, or finally, I guess, I hope when the time comes when an error has to be reported, that we all remember to do so with grace. It's important to remember there's a human on the other side of that email or tweet or Facebook post. Whatever we do, it can always be done better with kindness and courtesy. I mean, fair. I guess there are jerks on the other end sometimes, but we don't need to explore all the edge cases here, right? I think that's going to do it for me this week. Next week, let's talk about something that isn't going to have Jamie wondering why he's sponsoring the show, shall we? What do you want to talk about? Drop me a note in the comments. Maybe that codename Hive that completely stormed onto the scene, all completely designed and freshly in development and playtesting. What's that about? And no, I legitimately have no idea. I'm not trying to play coy with you. I'm as curious as you are. In any case, I'll talk to y'all next week, and if for some reason you're unable to catch the video before 2022, I hope you're having, or do have, a very happy holiday. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for watching. Bye.